Let's go back to our top story now. The next round of talks on the Syrian crisis scheduled for Monday. Joining us now from Vancouver is Nader Hashemi. He's the director of the Centre for Middle East Studies for the University of Denver. Mr. Hashemi, always good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. So the major sticking points remain even before these talks start. You know, the future of President Assad, a pretty big one for one. Is this just the two sides standing their ground or a sign of how things are going to go?
I think a sign of how things are going to go. This peace process has always been premised on this faulty assumption that if we can only get the two sides together, they're going to kiss and make up and agree to a transitional government and a peace plan for Syria. But as both sides have stated just recently, they have contradictory positions, fundamentally revolving around the question of the future of the House of Assad. And I guess highlighting this problem is that we're not talking about simply, two sides. We're talking about many sides. There's a huge regional dimension to this conflict, primarily led by Iran and Saudi Arabia and its allies. And then there's an international dimension led by Russia and its allies at the UN Security Council and the United States and its allies, just highlighting the complexity of this particular conflict.
So is the UN envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura, is he being unrealistic then when he's talking of some pretty lofty goals ahead of those talks, possible new governance, new constitution, new elections even, while the government and opposition aren't agreeing on much? Just how realistic are Staffan de Mistura's goals here?
Yeah, I think he is being overly optimistic about the prospects for a diplomatic settlement. We often hear that this conflict in Syria does not have a military solution. And I agree with that, but I also disagree with it in the following sense, that the prospects for a lasting peace in Syria will actually be dictated by battlefield conditions on the ground that lead toward a situation where the Assad regime and its backers agree to negotiate seriously the departure of Bashar al-Assad. Until that happens, then I think we're simply living in a delusional world, thinking that we can arrive at a peace agreement based on existing battlefield conditions and based on the fact that right now it is Iran and Russia that are in the driver's seat and that are determining not only the battlefield conditions, but also what's being debated and negotiated around the negotiating table. So I don't think there's any prospect here for a breakthrough. I think we're simply in a holding pattern until one of the sides, primarily Russia or Iran, decides to relaunch the war. And fundamentally, I think we're in a longer holding pattern here until the next president of the United States is determined to see whether he or she wants to shift U.S. policy and try and resolve this conflict in a more serious and substantive way.
But things have changed on the battlefield somewhat in the last few weeks, haven't they? I mean, this latest round of talks are starting after the most substantive ceasefire over the course of the civil war. Does that not bode well for the talks?
No, it doesn't, because I think what's happening right now is Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime are simply consolidating their recent battlefield gains, waiting for another opportunity to advance their positions, resupplying themselves, and waiting for another opportunity. So simply because there is a temporary cessation of hostilities, which by the way is still killing hundreds of people since the deal was reached, doesn't suggest that we are anywhere close to a negotiated settlement. I think we're still far away from it, and we're simply in a temporary pause. So those people who think that simply because we had this negotiated cessation of hostilities and there's going to be negotiations in Geneva on Monday, and that we might be closer to a breakthrough, I think that is a deep illusion. We are a long way away from this conflict being resolved, unfortunately.
Nader Hashemi, Director of the Centre for Middle East Studies for the University of Denver, thank you as always for your time. Thank you.